April 5, 2025, the air was thick with tension and anticipation as the sun rose over a divided nation. Across America, a wave of unrest surged like a tempest, gathering strength in every corner of the country. It was a day that would be etched into the annals of history. A day when the people took to the streets under the rallying cry of "Hands off." The message was clear. Enough was enough. The discontent simmering beneath the surface had erupted into an unprecedented demonstration against the stringent tariff policies of President Donald Trump and the ambitious government reforms championed by Elon Musk. From the National Mall in Washington, D.C., to the sun-soaked streets of Florida, the chorus of dissent rang out, echoing a warning that reverberated beyond borders. Beware of the consequences of one's own actions. This was not merely a protest. It was a movement born from the collective anguish of those who felt betrayed by the very policies that were meant to revive their nation. Over 1,200 protests erupted across all 50 states, drawing together an extraordinary coalition of voices: seasoned scientists, enraged farmers, veterans, and everyday citizens, each bearing witness to the chaotic fallout of economic decisions that seemed to favor the few at the expense of the many. As the morning unfolded, the National Mall transformed into a sea of humanity. Over 20,000 attendees gathered, brandishing flags and signs that boldly proclaimed their defiance against what they perceived as authoritarian overreach. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a mix of hope and despair. Civil society organizations, once fractured and hesitant, united under a singular message. Trump's administration was overstepping its bounds, stoking fears that rippled through communities already grappling with uncertainty. Among the crowd was Sarah, a middle-aged farmer from Iowa, her face weathered by years of toil under the sun. She clutched a sign that read, "Farming is not a game." The tariffs had wreaked havoc on her livelihood, crippling her ability to export corn and soybeans to international markets. As she stood surrounded by fellow protesters, she felt a sense of solidarity that had been missing in her life for far too long. The stories of loss and fear echoed in her heart, each voice adding fuel to the fire of her determination. She thought of her family, her neighbors, and the future of her farm, all threatened by decisions made far away in the halls of power. In Florida, the protests took on a different flavor. The sun blazed down on a group of veterans, many of whom had served in foreign lands, now standing shoulder to shoulder with activists and students. They held signs that read, "We fought for freedom, not fear." The irony was not lost on them. They had risked their lives to protect democracy, only to see it eroded by policies that seemed to disregard the very principles they had fought for. Among them was Mark, a former soldier who had returned home to find his community struggling. The local economy was in decline, and the tariffs had only exacerbated the situation. As he raised his voice in solidarity with the crowd, he felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this was the moment they could reclaim their power. As news of the protests spread, the discontent reverberated beyond American borders. In cities like Berlin, London, and Paris, Americans living abroad joined in solidarity, their voices blending with the global chorus of dissatisfaction. They marched through the streets, their signs echoing the sentiments of those back home, underscoring a collective frustration with trade tariffs and the lack of political accountability. Social media buzzed with images of protests, creating a tapestry of resistance that transcended geographic boundaries. The world was watching, and the stakes were higher than ever. The motivations behind the protests were as diverse as the individuals who participated. For some, it was personal. A mother in California spoke of her son, a recent college graduate who had returned home unable to find work due to the economic downturn. A scientist from Massachusetts lamented the loss of research funding as companies cut back in response to the tariffs. A group of teachers in Texas rallied for their students' futures, fearing that the instability would lead to cuts in education funding. Each story added a layer to the narrative of discontent, weaving a rich tapestry of human experience that could not be ignored. As the day wore on, the atmosphere shifted. The initial energy of the protests began to transform into a palpable sense of urgency. People were not just protesting, they were demanding to be heard. The stakes had risen, and the consequences of inaction loomed large. The government, perceived as neglectful and unresponsive, faced a reckoning. The protesters were determined to hold their leaders accountable, to remind them that the lives of ordinary citizens were not mere statistics in a ledger, but stories filled with hopes, dreams, and aspirations. In the heart of the National Mall, a young woman climbed onto a makeshift platform, her voice ringing out above the crowd. She spoke of her family's struggles, of the small business that had been forced to close its doors due to rising costs and dwindling sales. Her words resonated with the crowd, each syllable a reminder of the fragility of their collective future. As she spoke, the crowd swelled with emotion, a wave of shared pain and determination washing over them. They were no longer just individuals. They were a movement, a force to be reckoned with. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the gathering, the protesters held hands, forming a human chain that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a powerful symbol of unity, a testament to their resilience in the face of adversity. They chanted together, their voices rising in a crescendo that echoed through the streets of Washington, D.C. and beyond. We are the people. We are the future. The sentiment rippled through the crowd, igniting a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The protests, however, were not without their challenges. As the day progressed, there were moments of tension as law enforcement monitored the situation closely. The protesters remained largely peaceful, but the fear of escalation loomed in the background. There were whispers of counter-protests, of those who supported the administration's policies and were prepared to confront the dissenters. Yet, the protesters held their ground, their resolve unshakable. They understood that this was a pivotal moment, one that could define the trajectory of their democracy. As night fell, the glow of candles illuminated the faces of the protesters, casting shadows that danced in the flickering light. They shared stories, memories, and dreams for a better future. It was a moment of reflection, a chance to honor those who had come before them and to envision the path ahead. The sense of community was palpable, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggle. Each individual was a thread in a larger tapestry, woven together by a common purpose. As the protests continued into the night, the world outside the United States watched with bated breath. The implications of this day stretched far beyond the borders of America. It was a reminder that the fight for democracy was universal, that the struggles of one nation resonated with the struggles of many. The protests highlighted a global concern regarding trade policies and the need for political accountability. People everywhere were grappling with the consequences of their leaders' decisions, questioning the promise of a brighter future. In the days that followed, the momentum of the protests did not wane. The stories shared on the streets of America found their way into the halls of power, forcing politicians to reckon with the growing discontent. The protests became a catalyst for change, a reminder that the voice of the people could not be silenced. As the nation grappled with the implications of the protests, the message remained clear. The fate of democracy hung in the balance, and it was up to the citizens to demand accountability and action. April 5th, 2025 marked a turning point in American history. It was a day of reckoning, a day when the people rose up to reclaim their power. The protests served as a reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation and vigilance. In the face of adversity, the citizens of America came together, united by a common purpose and a shared vision for the future. They understood that the consequences of their leaders' actions could no longer be ignored, and they were determined to forge a path toward a more just and equitable society. As the sun set on that tumultuous day, the echoes of the protests lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the power of collective action. The people had spoken, and their voices would not be forgotten. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but the spirit of resilience and determination would guide them. They were ready to confront the consequences of their leaders' decisions, to demand a brighter future for themselves and generations to come. And as they stood together, hand in hand, they knew that they were not just fighting for their own lives, but for the very soul of their democracy.